speaking of doing whatever they want, that's a segue into talking about Doctor Strange. The new Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness has hit, and it's hot for the theaters today. I don't know why I'm leading into it like nobody knows what it is. If anybody's tuning into this, especially if they've heard any episodes of Sharon and myself talking about these things, they know what they're getting.
Welcome to the rabbit hole.
This is going to be there's several as we try to focus. We're both super fans here, I think, of these things, obviously, but at the same time, we always are picking apart some of the psychological impact and psychological elements of some of these stories. And gosh, here we are, as it's been heralded as the MCU's first real horror movie, like some real horror movie tropes and some. I believe the most jarring deaths that we've seen in the Marvel Universe in some ways, even though they're not necessarily the people that we know and love, but they're just the starkness of how they're done and that they're actual violent deaths. So anyway, lots to pick apart here.
Oh my gosh, so much.
Oh yeah.
There's and I think it was brilliant. And again, like so many other things we've talked about, is that there's this larger canon. There's all these different things. And again, I get that, there's always fan theories or there's talk of this or talk of that. I mean, the one that I thought was hilarious was the whole, like, if I saw another meme of somebody photoshopping Tom Cruise's face onto an Iron Man suit, it's like, oh, get over it. And the, and also too, in terms of, well, okay, we've got multiverses and what are we going to have in them? And then, okay, well, Spider-Man did this and then this one did that. And the weird sense of expectations is like, yes, it opens up stuff. But as we talked about before, like, remember we talked about like Spider-Man and like when you see those scenes and all those different things, are they there as launching off points for, Multiverse of Madness, or are they launching off for other things? Or are they sometimes just that, here's the nod, we can't put in all of the things. So therefore it's a way of putting it in, not leaving it and having it being this big gap, but also knowing that that's all we can do at this point or at this. So we got the nod, we filled in the blank. Yes, it might seem like it's token, but then that's also the other part too, is like, again, you never know what's the Easter egg, we're just trying to round this out so that nobody says we didn't do it. And what's the thing that's, going to turn into something else. But it's amazing how much people invest in, well, they did this and this, so therefore, or I have expectations of blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, you know what? Then go join the movie industry. Go get a job.
Go make
but get off my Facebook about it.
Yeah, I know. I'm one of those where I feel like I have a lot of little fan theories and headcanon in my own head. And I obviously am strongly emotionally invested in a lot of these things, but and so, I have those feelings too. Where it's like, gee, I wish they would have done this. But at the same time, I'm like you. It's like, well, I'm not the one making the story, and certain things I knew, for example, going into this, that Wanda was probably going to be the bad guy, even though I really like Wanda and I didn't want it to happen. But I know they're drawing from like House of M, and they're drawing from some of the other comic, story arcs where Wanda has her moments, or where if she has her arc that she goes through, that includes villainy, right? And it sure does now, as far as villainy goes.
Well, and what's interesting too, and I wasn't aware of this initially, but again, my son goes, a bred a nerd that found his own rabbit hole. So what can I say? One of those, oh God, the student has exceeded the master in some places where it's like, oh, I hadn't read that particular. Okay. Teach me. But it was the idea that, again, when you think about the impact that COVID had, initially what was from what he has said, that this was actually supposed to come out before WandaVision, but then the TV stuff was easier to, kind of get out and going, so that some of their, like, Marvel's own timeline and order of things, so that they actually had to do some rewrites because WandaVision was supposed to come after the fact. So this was more about some other. So I think first of all, the fact that, if people are wondering about things, don't just sit there and go, okay, so it's what was supposed to happen before and therefore, and then it leads to the hex. It's like, no. They did the rewrites. And just because certain things, if anything, actually, to me, this works. And had he not like informed me of that, it wouldn't have mattered in a sense, because you see what happens in WandaVision. You see her go off and study to become, the Scarlet Witch is how, so that's there. And then this happens afterwards with the rewrites. This still makes sense because we don't know what she was learning in that place, in that space. We don't know how she was embodying this. We don't know all these other things. So the fact that she's even, as you see there, constructed this reality where you see this, oh, here's the nice, pretty orchard. And then you're like, oh, not so much. Kind of a hellscape.
Yeah.
Wow. That's, talk about, like, again, a nice bit of icing on that.
There's that there's that part, right, where Doctor Strange says, and it's interesting, the slip in the little, I don't know if it's a spell or whatever it is, that he says, like, wow, it almost tastes real. And she says, you mean sweet? Yeah, I mean sweet,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know why did I say real? That's funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, and it is interesting how those happen. I guess also, speaking of that, of how COVID and things get changed, America Chavez's power of hopping dimensions was supposed to actually be the fundamental reason why the spell gets messed up in No Way Home. But they had to switch the order of those, right? So, or, there's little things like that they have to write around. But so who knows, and I think that kind of and going back to the way it's presented, I think that the things in this movie are much more indicative, speaking of source material, I guess, of Doctor Strange type of adventures, which is weirdness, magic, evil, undead, that kind of stuff. That's what he fights, that's how that works. But
yeah.
So I felt like I had to make a mental shift before even watching the movie. I said, I know Wanda's going to be evil. I don't know how evil, or I don't know if she'll be an anti-hero or a straight up villain. Turns out it's a little bit, the latter, but a lot of it. And I had to wrap my mind around it and say, I'm just going to embrace the story then, even though, gosh, I really like Elizabeth Olsen's character. I like how she plays the Scarlet Witch, and I'd just love to see her be an Avenger. But I knew it was probably going to happen. So once and so that actually touches on something that I wonder, it's a complaint people have that I think that they're open to, and there's no way around it, but to acknowledge that, yeah, this is something that, you gotta think about. Wanda as the grieving mother that becomes sociopathic monster killer, whatever. And how about that as like the crazy woman who's scorned or spurned, or, that's how she's going to respond to loss. There's a trope there that they're leaning into, right? That they're,
that was the one issue that I had was on one level, I got it in the sense that like you, it was okay, what are they doing and how are they doing this? And that to me, it's not really a stretch in the terms of you go through WandaVision and you see that, yeah, she's going through grief and loss. So she creates this alternate reality in which she has kids and Vision is back and all this other kind of stuff. And then that reality gets shattered when people come into the Hex. And again, you get the allies like Jimmy and Darcy and Monica, and all these things happen. And then she goes off to this place, and so you think, oh, okay, well, she's all good. And I was like, well, stop and think about it. She went through one, again, way of processing her trauma, compartmentalizing, dissociating and creating alternate things. But at the end of it, it wasn't like everything was wrapped up in a bow. If anything, it was more of the great. So that thing that I went and did to kind of put myself again in a bubble, literally, to protect myself from this stuff, that bubble got popped. And so now I'm mourning the loss of children. And then the one thing that was getting me, again, bloody social media stuff and people with the whole loss of her fake kids. And you're like, not fake kids. Not fake kids. She would have gone through the process, and that the idea is that even if again, suspension of you have suspension of disbelief in all these like how many bajillion other ways,
Right, but we
and
can't
yet
regard this as real
somehow,
grief, right?
yeah, exactly.
Well,
You know,
and I
so
think
you have all this other stuff, but then you fail to recognize that that was a lived, and this goes even, I would say, to the idea that, it's this funny thing where we will use things like visualization. So we all know about the basketball players and the hockey players, and if you just visualize this or if you visualize that, and then people will take that off into the weird, wonderful worlds of manifestations and whatnot,
sure.
and pull out their The Secret and whatever else, and again. Okay. We are talking about sorcery and magic users right now, so why not? So you've got all this other kind of
It
stuff going on.
fits.
But then at the same time, it's like, okay, well, hold on. We all know, and we use this in our own work, where it's the idea that there are certain things where, in a sense, your brain can't tell the difference. Like when you wake up from a horrific nightmare, your brain can't tell the difference as to whether you really did that thing any more or less than you walk down the street or us doing this. So it is this thing where your brain processes certain things the same way. And there are things that we can use to our advantage with that. And again, we have no problem with visualization and what that does to help your basketball game. But when it's like, okay, hold on. Well, yeah, she constructed all of this stuff, but again, the way her brain processed it is going to be just the same. So why is it that, it's okay if this basketball player does it and it's real and I can use it to, make $1 million next week if I just visualize the 5 following things 6 times a week. But in this case, it's fake kids. And you're like, no. Neurologically, the exact same thing.
Right.
And if anything, more of a loss or more of a problem than you and your basketball, situation.
Well, you touch on, it reminds me of something that was very fundamental to my education when I first became a psych major, was that my professor of the course that turned me onto it, talking about psychosomatic disorders and saying people die from psychosomatic disorders. They're not fake. They're just psychological in nature. We use that. It's because we still don't believe in the brain. We still don't believe in mental health, as body health. But to say, a psychological illness is an illness of an organ failure in the body often, which is the brain, and so that's where we experience our reality, is through our perceptual experiences. And I was one of the things that as we're talking about this and thought I had is how much do we want to, I don't know if we want to call it culpability. Maybe that's a little strong. We'll see how we feel about this. But the response that the world in general, but specifically as personified in Doctor Strange, has to Wanda and her pain. And we saw this in WandaVision too, where it's like, oh, we're going to just dissect your dead husband, partner, whatever, that you... and you're going to come in here and you're going to take him, and then we're going to lie to everyone and say that, you're a bad person, and we're going to go. And then when this happens with this town, we're going to target you and try to kill you. And we're going to, there's an escalating, we've got to take you down reaction to this, like, let's say grief overreaction from a pretty powerful person. So anyway, but so in Doctor Strange's response, he comes in and the very first response, your children aren't real. And also then she points out that her sacrifice of having to kill the love of her life to protect the universe was immediately meaningless. And if you think about it, she didn't say this in the movie, but the reason it was meaningless was that Thanos undid what she did. And what did he use? He used the time stone. Where did he get the time stone? 15 minutes before Doctor Strange handed it to him. Yeah. Right? So here's the guy who gave someone the tool that undid the thing and that led to this. And also the guy who said, this is the only way, we got to go this way. And it was a way that included what she had to do and everything that happened, right? And he's the guy who's telling her, your kids don't exist at all. What are you talking about?
And again, and I think this is as much as on one level, yeah, it's the, oh God, and this is this thing where it's like you wonder how much people read the nuances, because on one level, yes, there is the trope. Okay, she's the bad person, and that's where I still see her. She's an anti-hero in this, because if anything, what it represents is, this is why women, when they point something out and they're not listened to and heard, and then they get angry, then they're the crazy biatches kind of thing, and that they don't get it and you're overreacting. So if anything, I mean, her response to everything, again, it doesn't make it good, wonderful, or whatever, but it's when somebody is experiencing loss and you devalue it and you diminish it, and you're doing all of these things that you think are helpful, or giving somebody a dose of reality. Hey, you know what? This isn't about you and like, do you have a match and a gas can? You're walking up to somebody that's already got some things flaming here, and you're coming over with the whole gasoline tanker, and you're like, just it's like a fire hose, and you're opening it, and then you're wondering, and it becomes about, and the complaints become about the person's reaction and how they're overreacting, and a failure to acknowledge what was done that caused that reaction. So it's oh, well, why are you suddenly on fire? Why are you this and that? Failing to acknowledge standing there with the gas hose.
Yeah.
And you don't get to stand there with the gas hose and blame the person that's on fire for the fact that they're screaming on fire, when you're the one that aimed the gas hose at them while they were holding a match.
Yeah, and some of these thoughts are developing now as we're talking for me, but it's interesting to see once again going to Strange's reaction, and she even calls him out on it and says, you broke all the rules of time and space to get what you wanted. And then when I do it, and you're a hero. When I do it, I'm a villain. And she even says that, like, that doesn't seem fair, and it doesn't actually. And you see how throughout this story and this movie, and certainly, you see it where he continues to do that. Like throughout, I mean, could you say, is there an arc where Doctor Strange learns something? And yeah, we see that in there. There's some acceptance he has to do, especially in issues with his relationship, right? But
even that gets
resolved. That gets resolved, and
it gets resolved because it all gets resolved. And then, who does he hop into a portal with? Clea. Exactly. So it's look at, dude still comes out, like, again, every divorced woman, look at all this shit that he, pardon my French, put me through. Yeah. And then he gets to remarry this person, next marriage, but he's left me with all this grief. So yeah, there's some tropes there, but they're not the ones that I'm sure a lot of the fanboys are going to really like.
Right. No, I don't think you pick up on them. And even my favorite, I'll say my favorite as far as like the cool factor is when it was the point where here's Doctor Strange reanimating a corpse from another dimension, and then fighting off hell demons, and then turning the undead spirits into a cloak that he then uses to fight as a zombie against it. As that happened, and that ghosts all become a big cloak around his shoulders, I turned to my daughter and I was like, this movie is fantastic. This is pretty awesome. But that's totally against all of the rules and oaths and the wizard and everything. I mean, apparently, at least that's what they say, in this. And they're like, you're animating a dead body. You're not allowed to do that. You're dream walking, which is the thing that you said is bad and that drove your altar crazy, and that, all this. And just basically, and yes, but we can look at that and say, well, it's for the greater good. He's trying to save this child. Well,
and this is the part that's interesting. Yeah. Exactly, because this is the whole thing, is that on one level it's like, oh my God, this is awesome, and yes, sometimes you do have to break the rules, and that from a problem solving perspective, he's found all the little loopholes and the gray areas. So in some respects, yes, he gets to do it, and it is, again, both visually and from a plot perspective and all these other kinds of things, wonderful. But but again, I hate to say this, it's one of those things that, again, fits in with the larger stereotypes of the world where, guy breaks the rules, he's an innovator. Woman breaks the rules, insert derogatory term. And that's the part that I think was interesting about it, because in some respects it did capture that. And that, yes, she does, have an aha moment. And what I think is interesting is that you watch her go through all of this. And when you think about what her motivation is, this is about, again, all the grief and the loss, the first coping mechanism that she did. Again, and I think this is sort of what parallels our own recovery. And so many times you do the thing, you think you've got it, it seems to work, and then you realize that coping tool or that thing, it temporarily solved this problem. But manufactured 3 other ones. And now that this thing doesn't work. And what I even thought of was, the idea of what's called dysfunctional daydreaming, that we all daydream. But then there's that, okay, at what point are you, again, dissociating, escaping into daydreams, alternate realities, to the point that you're no longer engaging with life and solving the problems? And that, to me, it's like the hex in some respects kind of represents that. They talk about your, so when they talked about dream walking, it was like, okay, well, this in a sense kind of fits right in. Yeah. and now she's taking it to the next level. Oh, I did this in my reality. Well, hold on. Now that I know all of these other things, I can just pop into this other world and I'll just pick up where my other person, is. And then, and it's like, they will get it. And you're like, okay, so no, hold on, honey. Like, again, in not supporting you and having dismissed all of these different things and then letting you just go walk away, again, unsupported. Oh God, we left you to double down.
Well, there is, yeah.
Here's a treatment plan. You seem to be fine. Oh, look at your EAP has run out after 8 things. Here you go. We're signing off. Call us back should you need us. Wait a minute. Why is my former client the headline?
There's an attitude. No, it's really fascinating because there is an attitude when he says in the beginning to her, well, I'm not here to talk about what you did in the town. That's fine. It's no biggie. And it's almost like we're doing you this huge favor of saying no biggie, which, let's be honest, that was a biggie. I mean, to the people in the town, they probably weren't thrilled. So there's already, but we're not going to come and help you about this, by the way. The only people in the universe who could have any semblance of empathy that would mean anything is all the supers, all the altered people out there who could come and say, boy, we all fought in that war and we all had a great loss, and yours is one of the worst losses. No, we're just going to leave you alone somewhere in a field to, make a fake apple orchard. And once again, you could say whatever about, her openness. The one thing that becomes to where the dysfunctionality starts to come in, that probably separates this a little bit, is very much like, it's sort of like addicted thinking, compulsive thinking, unhealthy coping mechanisms, where she crosses a line at some point to where it becomes not about, I want my kids to be alive again, to it's like, well, they are. We've already found that out. They are. They're with a loving mother, by the way, in most realities, it seems. Yeah. Her, right? Other versions of her. She does cross that line to where it's like, what I need and deserve and can get because I have the power and ability to do it is, I can get them and then I will have that, right? It becomes there's an I that comes in there. But I think that goes back to the saying of, she's been told by everybody her whole life to use her powers the way they tell her to. And, it's like, you can't have this. It's like, yeah, well, I can actually. So who are you to tell me I can't? I can do this.
Well, and again, going into that idea of like, especially when you're in a bad place, and it's that whole thing about, you think about all the different kinds of thought traps people can get sucked into. So it's that all of that, you maximize all the negative, you minimize any positives. It's black and white thinking. You get into comparatives. So why does so-and-so have this instead of that? And so there's even the comparatives again between her and Steven. If you're going to look at it from the, why does he still, despite, having all these different women and he still gets somebody that likes him, but then they understand that, no, this isn't going to work, whatever. Right. So it's he's still getting something and I'm getting, so you can see how she's getting into that comparative thing. And it's, well, why do all of these other versions of me get to have my kids and I don't? And so why do that? So, and again, it's that one of those things that where we know, again, and we all engage in it at some point. It's again, to what degree and at what point do we intervene and go, okay, well, hold on, like this, the surefire way to dig yourself into any hole, if you're even starting off from a good, healthy place, is to get into that weird comparative thing. Mm-hmm. Because somebody else is not living, what you're seeing on their social media is not necessarily reality. It's curated. So that kind of thing. And so that's the thing, is that she gets caught up in that. And like you say, it becomes less about, her kids and making sure they're safe. It's about, I deserve to have these kids too. And that I had them for a bit and then they got taken away from me. And all of this other kind of stuff. So like the rawness and the anger that was there was, again, because on so many levels, she just kept getting dismissed and that there really wasn't any empathy. And so again, it was everybody keeps abandoning me. I can't trust anybody else. I've just got to go do these things on my own. And then, a loss of perspective, but at the same time, a very reasonable loss of perspective, because anytime there's been anybody around to reflect things back to her, I mean, literally the last support and the last, things that she had was when you had Darcy and when you had Jimmy and Monica kind of go, oh, okay, hold on. But then again, off somewhere else, and she doesn't have that anymore. So in a sense, again, gas on a fire, and she's got no other sounding boards that can reflect something back to her in a positive, supportive way. Instead, it's the dismissive, well, we're not going to talk about the past. Where it's like, actually, no, we kind of, if we do not if we do not get to the roots of the weeds, the garden is going to get even more like, breaking off the head of the dandelion does not get rid of the dandelion crop on
and
your front lawn.
here's another, another point towards the absence of trauma recovery and trauma therapy in superhero worlds. How I've always said, Batman is a round of EMDR away from not being Batman. The Punisher, is a prescription away from not, murdering all those criminals. And so obviously, there'd be a less interesting story to be like, here's a kid whose parents were killed who got over it, but or healed from it, whatever. But on the same token, it's like, here's the consequences of untreated trauma in a way. If we want to look at it that way and say, is there a culpability with the, also, it's interesting, the pride that you could look at it as there's pride and narcissism, both of the sorcerers on Earth 616 or the Illuminati in the other dimension, right? Because they treat the whole thing like everybody's like, yeah, she'll try to do whatever, but we're not worried about her. We're worried about these greater philosophical arguments or these greater things over here. And it's like, and she says all the way up to when she turns completely, all right, I'm committed now, I'm going to do whatever. She says, okay, I'm going to just let loose. And I haven't done that yet, by the way, And it's like, once she does, you realize, wow, she really had not let loose her capabilities to say, I'm going to use all my capabilities against you. And it's not going to be that tough, actually. I'm going to walk. It's like walking through a wet paper bag, as far as walking through these a bunch of heroes that are very, very powerful. Right. And so she's not been taken seriously.
And again, and I think that explains, again, if we think about, how does somebody get to a certain point in their life, and we think about the overrepresentation of folks with diagnoses in in terms of the interaction with the justice system that are incarcerated, and that it's, again, how much of that was based on not having early responses, either, again, how many things would be addressed if we all had more stable and rich, in terms of the social determinants of health? How many things would just be prevented at that level? And then even if you, can't make, the world a totally, warm, fuzzy, supportive thing, things are still going to happen, right? But that ability to take seriously and represent and support people, recognize and accept and support people earlier on. But instead you get to these things where it's like, yeah, it culminates in so and so doing the thing, and oh gee, what did they do wrong? And it's like, well, actually, if you go back, there were like how many opportunities where what was supposedly offered as support or the intervention or the whatever was, not what they needed, and was in fact the gas can. And like you say, so the culpability, in terms of us as a society. And I think that's that in a sense, that's what she represents in terms of, again, yes, it's being done through the idea of a mother's grief and loss, but that idea, if you keep dropping the ball and you keep whatever, one of those things, like when I was in government, one of the things we talked about was like the use of restorative justice, and especially at early stages, because one of the things we realized, especially with youth, was that the sooner you incarcerate them, all you're doing is sending them to criminal grad school. So
yeah, and you can only double down, when you double down on someone and say, boy, this is one of the issues I had when I was in a lot of court-ordered treatment. And you saw a lot of people, especially with substances, where some people who had come up through their own recovery and their own sobriety tended to sometimes be very, very even cruel to say, I did it, you can do it, get it together, you piece of shit. And that whole like kick them in the ass mentality that I heard so much about when I talked to people and watched people going through it. Not that there wasn't anyone who responded to it, but 9 times out of 10, the way that I get to self-medicating in my life isn't because people haven't beat me up enough. It's usually much the opposite, right? And you can only beat on someone for so long before they start to look at the world and say, well, I guess I'm in a world now where I'm either the victim or the perpetrator.
Well, and that you create the self-fulfilling prophecy. So in other words, in a sense, she didn't choose to do this. Circumstances, it's the proverbial, you create the monster, right? The larger society creates the monster by what they didn't do, how they didn't intervene. And I think she represents that. And then again, like I say, I see a gendered aspect in there as well.
Yeah.
Especially in terms of how it plays out relative to Stephen's. And don't get me like I'm not trashing the movie, because I love what was done here. And what I'm actually curious about, in light of how they have represented these things, that I am wondering, is this less about playing into a trope because you've just fallen into the stereotype? Or is this playing into the trope to illuminate the trope? And then what I'm kind of wondering is, will the audience get that, or is it going to be something later? Well, if this is the playing into the trope to then kind of hit you in the face with it later, then I'm curious. I would love to think that's the thing, and that if some of the audience isn't getting it now, they'll get it later. And that's where I do think we saw it already with Loki, and we've seen it again in terms of again, redemption arcs. Oh, we're all on for Tony's redemption arc. Again, a little bit on, maybe a little, again, the Bucky's recovery arc had its, people had some hiccups around it, but again, still played very well, because again, we didn't see as much of the big bad stuff that he did. So we don't have that visceral thing. Loki, though, because we were aware of all
but we're all about.
Yes, look at how people had a problem with that. And you're like, you had no problem with the arms dealer, guy, Oh yeah, but he said he was sorry initially at the beginning first to lay that groundwork.
He was always down. And he was always so rad.
Yeah, exactly. This is Robert Downey Jr. He could do no wrong. Whereas you're like, oh, okay, Loki, again, we watched how people struggled with that. And
I'll be honest. I bet, I don't know the numbers, but I haven't heard enough people. Everyone loves Tom Hiddleston, let's be honest, Yeah. And, the idea of Loki being, there's a lot of people who just are pretty eager to embrace, oh, Loki's fine, whatever. I'll look past all the genocide. And that's fine. I'm probably on that list too. I'm like, yeah, redeem him, fine. I've said on this program, the accidents or the whoopsies or the mistakes or the things that people do in their moments of cruelty as a super being. Okay, that's always been this way in these stories. They destroy a planet, and it's like, well, and then they're around, and then of course it doesn't hurt that they have 80 to 100 years of storylines around most of these characters, to where, well, at one point or another, they've all done something. So, because it's interesting to come up with a story. No, but it's you go to this idea, it's the other version of Doctor Strange, and certainly our Stephen Strange does not go this far as what we see, but would have probably pre-Endgame, so in the very beginning, here's the Doctor Strange version, Protector Strange or whatever he's called, who's traveling with America through the multiverse, trying to protect her. And here comes the monster, and he's like, I can't save you, so I've got to kill you now. I'm going to kill you and take your power to myself, which is exactly what he's supposedly protecting her from. So in that case, here's a big, strong guy who's literally going to do exactly what Wanda's about to do. And for some reason, he's okay to do it, right? Because he's not trying to get his kids back or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, and I think the part that was interesting with that, and again, this is one of those where you almost, the part of me wants to do it, and then another part of me goes, okay, how many hours of my life will be lost on the big whiteboard of story timelines? And at what point, gee, maybe did he start messing, where did he, start doing the things? Because that's one of his things. And again, it reminds me again, like Tony, where there's that certain sense of arrogance and the intelligence that comes with it. And they do, again, creative problem solving, this kind of stuff. But what happens is that in some respects, he is trying to, again, sort out his own stuff, because his running thing is why is it that this relationship, again, he's popping into all these other different universes, and it's and I always come out of this without something like this relationship, no matter how hard I try, no matter what universe, it's just varying degrees of not working. And how pissed off is she at me at this point? Is she merely going to give me
if she
the
dies
hairy
in a
eyeball,
if she dies in a car accident, or I don't reach out to people, or in the case of in the movie, the one guy, it seemed like all he did was he didn't reach out for help after her wedding to just get some moral support, and he destroyed the universe over it, right?
So this always goes sideways. But and again, it's that weird thing where you've got them both happening simultaneously, and again, slightly different. But what was interesting was the fact that you watch him in that last situation after having done, like I said, all of these other things that we've already listed about the don't think that's in the rule book. Oh, pretty sure that's not kosher. And then it's the, oh no, but I don't have to steal her power. And then the idea is that you've actually been controlling this. And that was from a mentoring perspective. And from the, again, this is, you think about right back to the beginning where Stephen has always been like, the arrogant, da 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 da. And if anything, he was going to teach anybody, it was the, oh, well, that cut's too large. And why did you do the stitches that way? Like, really? They let you out of medical school? Kind of like that was the sort of thing that you were going to get. Even where it was the whole, like, who did they let work on my hands? And, well, I should have done it. Well, no, actually, because you needed your hands. Maybe it was your feet. Yeah, maybe she smashed up your feet. We could have let you, freeze your feet and stitch them up yourself, but they were your hands. But so to have him actually have that moment of where you see, and again, kind of like the Peter Tony thing before, where it's no, you've actually had this. Those places that you thought you went randomly, like we went everywhere that we needed to be. It seemed random. So you actually are controlling it. You just don't know. So there's that other kind of that reinforcement of the superhero, like, so. And I think to me that comes from he had his own aha moment where it's I keep making these same mistakes over and over and over again. And it's that old thing about, life keeps handing you that same lesson until you stop doing it. So that's where I think, to you learn and move on. And that I think that's what happened with him. And I'm going to say if there's a difference between him and Wanda, we get to watch him finally having that aha moment, getting off his own hamster wheel of let's keep making the same mistake in all the universes over and over again. And even that idea too, because think about how cynical he was when he first learned about, where he could go and do all these different things. And it's like, no. It's all about science and this and then. What are you going to be like meditating and yada, yada, yada. He gets it. He gets really cocky. He's upset by the fact that he's not the Sorcerer Supreme, but it then goes off and again, does these phenomenal things, but then has the aha moment where it's like, yeah, this was about having confidence in myself, about doing these things. And yeah, now I have confidence enough to walk away and stop beating my head into this wall. Here, America, you take your skills, you actually know what you're doing. You've been operating from a place of fear and self-doubt. Don't do that anymore. You got it. And I think that's the thing that's happened with Wanda is that all that's happened is she is still, again, unhealed trauma, more fear and doubt. And what I'm hoping that we do see is, again, that place where, because she did have, and I think we saw the light of it in the sense of, I'm a mom, I'm not a monster. And it's oh, wait a second, that's coming out of my mouth. And now that I'm hearing it with my, my kids from this universe have just like freaked out. They've done this, they've done that, and I'm not the monster. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hold on. And so that's what I think we're at.
So you're probably on the same page as me that you don't really believe she's dead.
No.
I mean, that would be so dumb. Yeah, to actually have her be dead. And even in the comics that they're drawing from in the House of M and whatever, when she, of course, a lot more backstory for Wanda in the comics with she's usually an X-Men character. Magneto's her father. I mean, she has a whole thing, but she's found to be alive after very similar events, kind of thing later on in another storyline. But anyway, so there's a lot of things they're drawing from there, and at least we know she exists in another universe. Plus, you still got like albino Vision kicking around somewhere, and so I think that the story of her and Vision and their super kids is not done yet, and I still hope for a redemptive arc where you're going to see that foursome together as a family again. I believe that's probably what we'll see,
and I think that's one of the things that's been nice about the fact that they've actually now tapped into the multiverse in these last two movies, and that again, and also tapping into it a little, with Loki, in that is that it gives you the opportunity to pursue different timelines and different stories and different variations. And I think we got, and again, one of those things about people's expectations in these movies is the kind of frustration or whatever. It's like, well, we got this interesting little taste, and then as soon as she got the answer to the is there somebody to look after your kids, you're like, oh man, they're all dead.
Yes.
All the stuff, she's going to do stuff, and now in a weird, interesting, good mom moment, okay, so the kids will be fine. Okay, I'm cleaning house.
Now you're spaghettified. Yeah.
We just got introduced to the Illuminati and all these cool versions of whatever, and their life expectancy is what? How long do you think that the battle is going to take, and what kind of scary ways?
Not as long as you'd think. And the other thing, I also thought it was great to have it was a little bit of a, not Tom Cruise in an Iron Man suit. It was Monica Rambeau as Captain Marvel, which was pretty awesome.
It was brilliant.
Or wait, is it Monica or Maria? I don't remember, but I think it's Monica.
That was Monica. Maria's her mom.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a second. Now okay, wait a second. Now you've got me going.
Yeah. No, it was Maria. It was Maria, wasn't it?
Yes.
Was Maria Rambeau.
Yeah, it was Maria.
Yes. And then, okay, gotcha. Okay. So we got so let's get tweet at us. Or don't.
We're trying to hold all of this in our heads. Stuff's gonna fall out.
So to wrap, I want to before we wrap up. One thing I was just thinking about is that you really draw a comparison to this and like let's say the Batman, where exact same thing as you mentioned though in the Batman, it's drawn out. He has to confront the audience is held by the hand and taken to a point where we have to confront that, he and the Riddler are actually doing the same thing with some of the same bad side effects. And he has to confront that. And that's not mid-story. That's the end of the story where it's like he now has to take that and move forward into the sequel and hopefully do better is his challenge to himself, which was very, very gutsy and captured the essence of Batman in a really cool way. And then, spoiler alert for the Batman, I guess I should have said, since obviously there's spoilers for Doctor Strange, but not really a spoiler. That's the theme of that movie. So with this, I it's a very interesting question you bring up, which is this could be interpreted the same exact way, but are most people interpreting it that way? Nobody said that. And for me, there's a reason to be hopeful that, maybe it is going the way you said, and it's going to be drawn out and we're going to see that. And then there's also a reason to not think that, which is the thing at the end where the end sort of happens and then undoes itself. There's this wonderful, weird, horror-esque cliffhanger at the very end where, you got, hey, everything's worked out and I'm walking down the street and then, oh my gosh, third eye. And the third eye was the sign of corruption that was in the other Doctor Strange. And it kneels over in pain and you're like, oh no, something's wrong. He's cursed. He's brought this on himself by his rule breaking. There's consequences as Mordo always said. And then, so that's my reason to be hopeful that maybe they'll take it that way. Then again, the end credit scene immediately shows him once again chillily walking down the street, and here's Cleo who bursts through and is like, "Hey, it's ride or die time. You gonna come with me and do something crazy?" And his third eye opens up just casually, and he's like, "I'm in." Yeah, and it's like fun times or whatever, and it's like adventure time. And so I kind of am like, well, which way are we going to go with that? Are we going to draw out the fact that, hey, dude, you essentially did the same thing as Wanda. You were saving kids. She was trying to say that, she went too far this way. You went too far this way. There consequences for going too far, even if it was for a good cause. Or is it just going to be like, hey, he's got a third eye now. That's dope.
Yeah, well, I'm curious to see what they do, and I can't imagine there being something without some sort of consequence, because I think it would be and again, and this is where all of these stories go in terms of the superpowers, because and why these stories are so rich is because, again, it's the whoopsies, it's the whatever, it's the, oh, wait a second, it doesn't matter how well intentioned you were. And again, even just thinking about that dynamic that exists, you talked about with, again, in terms of Stephen and Wanda, where it's the great, you did this thing for the greater good to undo the blip, but look what this did to me kind of thing. And look what it, the implication. So it's all of these things where, and I would say it's, again, perfect metaphor for things in mental health. it's not about your intention, it's about the impact. And we all know about the road to hell being paved with good intentions, and that we've all encountered situations where, I get what you think you're doing, and it's wonderful that you're well intentioned, but did you not think about this? And so I think that's the other part of it, is what they introduced was the possibility of, again, here are two different ways. Which path are we going to go down first? Or is one just the nod and and is one the path? What is it? But that idea of, again, intentions, and that being what, people get caught up in, as opposed to what's the impact of your actions, which is the more important part of it, because it doesn't matter how well intentioned you are. If something goes sideways and you don't take ownership for it, right, then what does that mean? And then especially, again, when I think about it through the mental health perspective, I don't care how well intentioned a clinician is, if they're not aware of their impact and take ownership of, okay, I did this thing and I realized, I did not know that, for all the different things we've discussed, this whole process has now just illuminated a new place of trauma. And that as much as I operate from a trauma-informed perspective, I inadvertently triggered you on this, and now there's a whole area. And take that ownership of, okay, so we cracked this whole thing open. It was done in a really awkward, painful way. Now I'm going to take ownership of that, and now I'm going to help you move through that too. And those kinds of things, like that's, so to me, that's both a human thing, how do we support those of us with diagnoses, and then how do we as professionals, accept the fact that we have a certain knowledge base, we might have certain lived experience, but that doesn't mean we're not going to stick our foot in it. And there isn't going to be, we all have to go through life, yes, with good intentions, but with the humbleness and the groundedness to accept that you're going to stick your foot in it. And when you do, don't get caught up in what your intentions were. Get caught up in what you stuck your foot in and what the impact was, and go there.
It's a really good point.
Lead with your intentions. Then, and I think that's what happened with Wanda. Everybody was leading with what their intentions were and failing to recognize the impact. And that, again, that's salt in the wounds. That's adding insult to injury. That's, again, going from the gas can to the gas tank.
It's flying too close to the sun and thinking it was the right thing to do because it worked. In a way, right? That's what we're kind of what we're saying. If we can put it in the terms of the Doctor Strange or any of the other, you look at how many times in these stories does someone do something that, wow, Strange, you're doing things that is gonna suppose that. Well, I guess there is that line in the end credit scene where she says, "You've caused an incursion, you got to fix it." So I guess that is there. That just popped in my memory. Because it's like, yeah, you've hopped dimensions, you've dreamwalked, you've done all these things that break these rules. And the point Mordo makes in number 1, where he says, the Ancient One did the same thing and it's caused consequences. She created Mads Mikkelsen, not the guy. We'd be grateful for that, I guess, because he's in every movie now. But the villain played by him. So, it is interesting to see that. And I know that one of the storylines, especially any real nerd will tell you that one of the ongoing conflicts in superhero stories and comics and movies is that the existence of the hero requires the existence of the villain, not just in the narrative of storytelling, but in those worlds of, the bad ups its ante along with the good. Batman starts fighting crime, and then that creates the Joker, a need for the Joker to exist.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too that you mentioned about Batman. We'll go down a different rabbit hole with that one another time. But yeah, exactly. Like this idea that, we're doing a thing, doing it all for the right reason. Oh, that's not what I thought was going to happen. And how soon does it get dealt with, or what, are the consequences immediate, or are they more long-term? And I think we're more used to, and we talked about this before a lot of times, especially with Spider-Man, a lot of times those consequences are immediate. Oops. The Staten Island Ferry is now in 2 parts. I went from the woohoo, I rocked it, to OMG. Oh God. Okay. They're here
big
my
time
superhero dad to pull my butt out of the fire and then give me a talking to.
So we've now laid teasers for a few other things we're going to have in other episodes. People will see either it's Batman or redemptive arcs or different tones and themes with superheroes. But let's make sure before we go, tell everybody what you're up to. Tell everybody what is going on with Speak Up and just other things that they can find that you're doing.
I know before we've always gone down the rabbit hole of trying to remember all of my handles and whatever. So if the work that I do is about taking this kind of stuff, especially fandom and Marvel related stuff, and using it as a filter and a framework like we've been doing here to help people better understand mental health and neurodivergence diagnoses, lived experiences, and how we can better support each other, learn more, and address these things from an empowering perspective rather than these, again, negative, stereotypical things that we tend to be surrounded by. So www.speak-up.co is my website, and that'll have all the social media handles, so we don't have to go to that rabbit hole. And I also work in the world of BTS, Bangtan Soyeon, and use their music and videos to do the same thing because of, again, the positive reinforcement and the fact that they model a variety of different therapeutic techniques and peer support, and again, take a positive and empowering perspective on lived experience. So no, a lot of it's just been about updating some stuff. Thanks to Moon Knight, I am now going to be adding dissociative identity in there because I think and we talk about in another episode of how well it reflects it, helps us understand it. And again, knowing folks with that diagnosis, how, again, it gives some, again, while cinematic, some authentic insight. So no, that's what I'm up to. Sort of the same old, doing some vast coaching for some different organizations where it's all about their employees that have come together with under, again, the shared diagnosis, again, in variable forms of variable attention stimulus trait. ADHD is what most folks call it, and doing coaching for them so that they can access that superpower in the different parts of their organization to their individual benefit, as well as that for their team.
Does a lot of good for a lot of people. I firsthand, as I've adopted a lot of your principles and shared it with people, I can see how much of a difference it's made to them too. So
well, that's awesome. Wonderful. Good to know.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.